If you will turn in your Bible to Numbers, chapter 33. Numbers 33. And even if you read on the up here, I'm not putting every verse down, but if you have your Bible open there and you're looking and you're seeing like just all these individual sentences with names you cannot pronounce, of place names. It's just this long list of little cities, little communities, and you're going, I can't wait to hear all about that. One thing that's fun to do, whatever the memory is you pull out the home movies. It's different now. I remember the days when we had a projector, and we'd have these reels and stuff. And then later on, it got to be where you could put in a V on your VCR, or and then later on you didn't even need that. You just unplugged something from the one, or you plugged it directly into there's all sorts of it, but there's something about being able to just look back and look at memories. One of the things my kids like to do is they'll pull out and they'll just grab an old 9mm, and one of the worst things is we always forget to rewind it afterwards, so the first thing is waiting for 15 minutes for the thing to rewind, but then just seeing, and it brings back everything. It brings back so many memories and stuff like that. Or when you go on a trip, and all you need is one picture. And you go, and floods of memories, of emotions even, of, oh, I'm so glad that's over, or whatever, all these different things that go on as you look at that, or whether you're scrapbooking, or whether you're seeing it on your iPhone or smartphone or whatever, and you're just looking back at a trip or something like that. That's something that I discovered. I do have an iPhone, and occasionally it'll say, hey, how would you like to watch your days down in Florida, and it's like, it's got this thing, there's this light music playing, that makes me want to cry, and it's just automatically just put it all together, and I'm just going, yeah, I remember that too, and it's just, it's like a nice little thing, and just bringing back all the memories, all the things that went along with that. And so one of the things about looking back, whether it be a trip or a stage of life or whatever, you are reminded of life lessons. Once, it wasn't me going on a trip, it was Candy. She was going to see her sister for a few days. Well, we were good, so she wasn't leaving. but she was, later on we weren't good, but I'll explain why. She said, Randy, could you put the luggage in the car? And I grabbed a piece of luggage. The toiletry bag, right? For some reason, totally didn't think about the other piece of luggage that was clearly in the room as well. And she trusts her husband to put things in the car. She didn't even look. She drove off and went to her sister's house and got to go on a shopping spree. For all the things that were not packed and stuff like that. And so it's just like, oh, wow, I packed the car, it's my fault, and all this other stuff. And suddenly she shows up, and she's like, I have no clothes. I have no clothes but the clothes on my back and stuff like that. Now listen, do you think I've made that mistake again? No. And I hope I never make that mistake again, because every time, listen, I'll check every luggage that's not even in the room just to make sure that, she might go, why is all this luggage in the car? It's empty. But I'm not going to make that mistake again. Life lesson learned. Life lessons. When you look back, whether you're looking back at 27 years of marriage and the things you've learned over the decades, or just the past year. Candy I'm going to tell on you a lot today. This is twice, and I have not asked her permission. So we'll have a nice conversation later, and I'll learn a life lesson. But she does something on birthdays and anniversaries that I think is really neat. And we'll pick on Josh. Okay, let's say it's Josh's birthday. And she'll say, Josh, what's the best thing this past year? You know, making him remember. And then sometimes she'll ask the opposite question, you know. Sometimes we'll do that best part of your day, worst part of your day type things. Or, you know, it's not very good conversation when it has to do with our anniversary, you know. What's the best part of this year about us? What's the worst part about us? Oh, nothing at all. Everything's wonderful. It's great, you know. Life lesson learned. Or maybe, you know, you're at a different stage in your children. They're all grown up and adults, and you can look back and say, oh, the life lessons that I want to tell all my children so that they won't do the same things I did wrong when I was the parent. Or you're just looking back at the past month. What have I learned? What have I learned? Whether it be a previous job or a lifetime of serving and now you're retired, or just last week. Taking time to look back so that those life lessons are not forgotten. And so basically the outline's just 2 points. The lessons in looking back, and then applied to life moving forward. The lessons looking back, again, to remember it, but then don't forget to do this, apply it. You know, make sure you always pack all the luggage. So let's look at the lessons looking back. It starts in verse 1 of chapter 33 of Numbers. Here are the stages in the journey of the Israelites where they came out of Egypt by divisions under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's command, Moses recorded the stages of their journey. This is their journey by stages. And so for the next 47 verses. It's then they went here, and then they camped there, and then they went here, and then they went there. Now listen. To us, you know, there's a couple little comments about some of the places, but to us, we're just going, you weren't on that trip. Now, we've been walking through a lot of it, but some of it, you know, our memories aren't that great. But to them, when they heard a city or a location, it brought back the memories. It brought back the feelings. It brought back the inadequacies that they had and what God did for them. And whose idea was it for them to stop and look back? The Lord commanded them. And I think it's a wise thing to do. Before moving ahead, we stop and look back. And so I'm not going to read every verse here, but I'm just going to highlight some of the journeys. And you're going to remember, because I've preached through this in this particular going through the book of Numbers, as well as when we went through the book of Exodus. And so it starts off with the beginning of the trip. Verse 3, the Israelites set out from Ramses on the 15th day of the first month, the day after Passover. They marched out boldly in view of all the Egyptians who were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had struck down among them. For the Lord had brought judgment on their gods. Now, when this is being read, and again, you think about who's listening to this as Moses is recounting this. We're talking about the descendants of the adults. You know, it's like looking at the past trips that you went on when you were a kid. You still remember it and all that, but your parents were the ones in charge and stuff like that. And so you've got, anyway, because of the 38 years, you've got people as old as 58 that are hearing this, who were about 18 when this happened. And you have those who were born after the fact and everything in between. And so you've got people who are going, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. And let me tell you, let me give you the details, Junior, because you weren't around and telling and retelling the trip. And so, let me tell you about how God delivered us. But here's the thing. In the lessons of looking back, and they really look back, if they were honest, they'd have to say, when Moses first came and said, hey, I'm here God told me to tell Pharaoh to let you go. And they're like, yeah, that's okay. But then Pharaoh wasn't happy about it and made him work more. And they're like, why did you mess it up? We like slavery. Don't do that. And so initially, if they were honest, they'd look back and say, you know what? When this first happened, we were going, just be quiet, Moses. You're making it worse. But Moses didn't listen to the people. He listened to God, and he persisted. And there was the first plague, and the second plague, and the third plague, all the way to the 10th plague, which is mentioned here, the death of the firstborn on all whose blood was not applied, the lamb's blood was not applied. And so they're remembering, oh, you know what? We resisted what God wanted to do in our life, but God rescued us. Has that ever happened? You resisted, but by God's grace, he still helped. He still rescued. Going on to the next place. Verse 8, they left Pi-Hahiroth and passed through the sea in the desert. You know that pass through the sea part? That's the part when all the Israelites, they're at a dead end at the Red Sea, and they look back, and Pharaoh and all his army is coming, and they said, oh, no problem. Is that what they said? No, they doubted. Oh, why did you lead us out here, Moses? Why did you, were there not enough graves in Egypt? You brought us here to die. That was their response. But you know what? Yet God delivered us through the sea. It's so funny when Moses prays to God about this, and God's like, get up, raise your staff, watch it happen. But remembering these things. Verse 8 continues, and when they traveled for 3 days in the deserts of Etham, and they camped at Marah. Now the word Marah would strike something to them, because in their language it meant bitter. That would bring them back, oh yeah, we were so thirsty. We've been in the desert. We just had a great victory, but after day, no water. And then we found water, and it was bitter water. If we drank it, it would make us sick, if not kill us. Oh, and guess what they did? They complained. And God said, throw a branch in there, Moses. And the water became sweet. Even though they griped and complained, God was gracious and turned the water sweet. And then provided more water. The next verse, they left Marah and went to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. See, they were so thirsty and all that, and all they saw was this little bit of water that 2 million people had to drink from. And then just over the hill were 12 springs and 70 palm trees that get out of the heat of the sun. And oh, man, wow, God was gracious. Verse 11. They left the Red Sea and camped in the desert of Sin. And they're going, yeah, we remember. That's an appropriate name for that. Because there we sinned. We complained about the lack of food. We complained about the lack of water. And now we complained about the lack of food. And God graciously gave us manna for breakfast. Manna means, what is it? Because when they looked at it, they said, what is it? And Moses instructed how they're to eat and all these other things, and we're not going to go into all those details. But not only did God give them manna for breakfast, he gave them quail for supper. That God just so supplied. They were hungry, and God supplied their need. Verse 14, they left Alush and camped at Rephidim, and where there was no water for the people to drink. Now, because they learned their lesson from Marah and Elim, they were like, okay, God, bring us water. No, guess what they did? They complained. We complained again for the lack of water. And God brought water from a rock. Strike the rock. And the water gushed out. And then, probably because they had all that water, we were attacked by the Amalekites. And God was our banner. You know, that flag that's held to say, keep your eyes on the king. Keep your eyes on the one we're serving. And it was that story of Moses holding, as long as he held up the staff, you know, they were winning, and when he got weak, and then they just held up his arms, and they found God is our banner. Our victory is through God. So again, going through these stories, going through this slideshow of all the things that have happened. They left Rephidim and camped at the desert of Sinai. Now they're for over a year. They're under the shadow of the mountain, and there God gave them the covenant. And how did they respond to God giving them the covenant? We broke it before it was written down. For while Moses was up in the mountain receiving the stone tablets, they were down there worshiping the golden calf. They left the desert of Sinai a year later and camped at Kibroth Hattaavah. And just by the name, they knew exactly that, because these names were named so they would remember. It's called the Graves of Craving. Not gravy craving, but the graves of craving. Where this is where we craved other food. We're tired of this manna. And God says, you want something else? I'll give you something else. God gave us enough to make us sick. And actually some died. Skipping down quite a bit, they left Ezon-Geber and camped at Kadesh. We remember Kadesh. That wasn't just a few weeks ago that we talked about the Israelites being at Kadesh Barnea in the desert of Zin. This is where we rebelled. This is what God said, here's your promised land. You're right at the edge of it. Go in. And they said no. The spies went in. They said it was dangerous, except for those two crazy guys, Joshua and Caleb. We're not going in. We'd rather die in the desert. And guess what God said? Okay. And we wasted 38 years in the wilderness. And you know, it's very interesting when you look at this passage. There's no more mention of the next place they went. They went, they left, they traveled, they went around, but God made them go full circle for 38 years and brought them right back to where they messed up. And there's no record of any journey, because it was just wasted years. That generation, one by one, sometimes in groups because of rebellion, dying. Then it mentions Miriam dying, it mentions Aaron dying, and then the Canaanite king of Arad who lived in the Negev of Canaan heard that the Israelites were coming, that we got attacked. We got attacked again by another army, and guess what? God gave us the victory again. And just think how all of these life lessons are working, of going, yeah, we messed up, but God was gracious. We did this, but God gave us this. And over again, as he's recounting all of these places that they went to, look at all the things. And it says they left the mountain of Abiram and camped at the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. There on the plains of Moab, they camped along the Jordan from Beth Shemesh to Abel Shittim. Now this is where they are. This is where Moses is recounting. This is where they're hearing all these stories. So we've already gone to the past and read all of those different places that they have been. And then it comes to, that's the lessons looking back. Now we need to apply it. Did we learn something? Or are we going to keep repeating the same error? What should they learn? What should I learn when I look back and when I do my things my way? My way's messed up. When it's just me choosing, I'm going to always choose wrong. When it's me trying to live for Christ in my own power, guess who's not going to live like Christ? My way's messed up. If these people looked at their history over and over again, oh, this is when I complained. Oh, this is when, I said, no, I'm not going in. Oh, this is, Moses isn't around. Let's play with this golden calf. I mean, over and over again, and over again, even though my way is messed up, God, your way is always right. After looking at 40 years of history, I look back and I see mess up. God, you're right. 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 How many times do we need to hear that lesson to finally get it? I'm so unreliable. God, you were always faithful. That's the lesson learned, hopefully. And so God says, okay, based on your past, based on that, if you realize your way's messed up, you are unreliable, but I'm always right and I'm always faithful, it should impact what you do in the future. And so on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, here's your future, here's the next trip, here's the next section of your life. When you cross the Jordan into Canaan, what are we to do? Based on what we've learned, what are we supposed to do? Drive out the enemy. Drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Do you have to understand that? No. But just realize your way's messed up, my way's right. And my way says, drive out. Now, again, please, just like I talked last couple times when we talked about, and the Israelites killed everybody. Okay, please. This is not saying, all right, go out and kill all those. No. Okay, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, okay? Our battle is spiritual. But here's some questions that we need to ask. What in my life needs to be removed? What do I need to drive out? What are the things that keep knocking me down? Relationships? Are there relationships in your life that when you're around them, you don't love the Lord as much? You're distracted. At best, if nothing, you're tempted to go away. What activities that hinder you from doing what God wants you to do? What habits are in your life? Because listen, life applied, lessons learned. I went camping with my brother. We were on the Appalachian Trail. And again, no, I didn't hike the Appalachian Trail. I hiked 10 miles of the Appalachian Trail. I left the 2,000 plus more miles for somebody else to do. But in that trip, and it was about, this time and stuff like that. And I brought all the things my brother said for the trip and stuff like that. And he had all the camping stuff. I mean, he had the water purifier and all this other stuff, and stuff. But one thing I remember him telling me, he said, okay, you got a sleeping bag? Yeah, I got a sleeping bag. Okay, great. What's it rated for? And I was like, what? It was a good one? No. What means rated is there's a temperature on it, And I looked at the temperature, and the temperature said 40 degrees. So it was rated for 40 degrees. And I'm like, okay, whatever, I'm warm temper. I'm all right, stuff like that. Well, we went there, and it was fine. The first day we did no problems, and then we hiked again, and the next night dropped into the upper 20s. Now listen, I'm like, I'm in the tent. We're in the tent. We're fine. Guess what? they meant that. If it's below 40 degrees, you're going to be cold. And I mean, I remember like getting up and putting my jeans on and as much clothes and then getting back in there. I was still cold. I was tempted to snuggle up with my brother. I didn't follow the temptation, but I mean, it was just like, no, I'm sorry, I'd just rather be cold. But anyway, and I love my brother, but not that much. So anyway, it was just, wow. And guess what? I have not gone camping. That lesson learned. I have not gone camping ever since. But if I happen to go, guess what? I'm buying a new thing. If it's any chance whatsoever of it going below 40, stuff like that. So again, what in my life? Will I listen to God? Or will I keep making the same mistake? Hebrews 12 says this, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders. What's hindering your walk? Again, I mentioned the relationships, the activities, habits. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Driving out the enemy. What in my life needs to be removed? What thoughts keep hindering me? 1 Corinthians 10, it's talking spiritual battle. And it says this, though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. So we're not talking about going out there and attacking people. It's a spiritual warfare. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. What are we talking about? We demolish arguments. That's what these strongholds, these thought processes, these anti-God thoughts, these every argument, every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. What thoughts are that I need to say, Christ, I need to bring this thought to you. Every thought, guess what? Every thought. Is this what you want me to be thinking about? Drive out the enemy. Destroy the idols. It simply does. Destroy their carved images, their cast idols, demolish their high places. Listen, don't make a museum and say, oh, look at all the wonderful artifacts and stuff like. No, this has been things that have been keeping people from me. Destroy the idols. So here's the question. Will there be a life lesson? What things in my life take the place of God? I've been listening a lot to a pastor. His name is Tim Keller, and he has the same definition and repeats it over and over again. He says, even when good things become the ultimate thing, they become an idol. They become my God. Even good things. I've got to work for a living. That's a good thing. God made us to work. But when work's the main thing, the ultimate thing, it has taken God's place. Appearance, stuff, pleasures. What things in my life take the place of God? Destroy the idols. Then he says, take possession of the land. Now listen. Well, I like that. That's a little bit better. The others were negative. I don't like that negative stuff. Well, guess what? God asked us to let go. Okay? There may be relationships you need to let go. Thought processes you need to let go. Things that we gravitate to worship. God says, let go so I can give you something far better. And that far better is Him. Take possession of the Lamb. Claim what God has given you. It says here, take possession of the land and settle in it. For I've given you this land to possess. Listen, but you aren't possessing it as long as you're allowing these other things in it. Distribute the land by lot, according to your clans. To a larger group, give us a larger inheritance. To a smaller group, a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be yours. Distribute it according to your ancestral tribe. Again, these are things that God has already said to them. It's like, all right, drive them out so that you can possess what I want to give you. Follow God's instruction. But if you don't, if you haven't learned the lessons of your past, how many times have you chosen to go your way against God's way and it turned out good? How many times do you have to repeat that before you finally get it? But if you don't, I'll let you know what will happen. If you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land, those who you allow to remain and become the barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side, they will give you trouble in the land where you will live. And then I will do to you what I plan to do to them. I'm planning to get rid of them from the land. And guess what? The Israelites initially were really good about this. But over time, forget the message, they went right back to it. And guess what God did? Guess what? The people became the barbs and the thorns. And God ultimately kicked them out of the land. Look at your past. Did it ever work out for you when you went your own way? God just took these people at his command. Moses said, let me remind you of some things. The same is true for your future. Will we learn from our past and have victory for our future? Or will we repeat and have to learn the lesson again and again? Let me ask you to pray with me. Jesus, I thank you. For us, it's neat to look back at their story because they messed up. But God, help us. God, I pray that even conversations happen on the way home. That, hey, what about our past? What about your week? What about your month? What about this past year of your life? What about when that happened? And God, that we would remember our own past. And just to be reminded, we're in charge, we mess it up. So God, to keep you to be the Lord. You are Lord. But help us to be willing and say, I submit this to you. I submit this area of my life that has distracted me from you. God, I bring this relationship to you and say, God, is this a relationship that I need in my life? Or is it going to just make me keep repeating the same things over and over again? God, help us. Help us to remember our own past, our own stories, so that we don't repeat the failures. But we learn, and learn to depend on you every step of our future. But I thank you that one of the lessons they learned was even though they messed up, you were still there. You loved them enough to rebuke them. You loved them enough to pick them up, to restore them. Because Jesus, you took all our mess ups. You took all our sin. And you paid the price. Help help us to follow you and not follow our own way. I pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.